It's just after 6:15. In the next 45 minutes, we shall be bringing you a background on Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who was today sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 13 women in the north of England. He was a young man so apparently ordinary that for 5 years he was able to elude the biggest manhunt in British criminal history. In that time, he drove freely over a wide area between Leeds and Manchester, attacking and murdering women. Some listeners may find parts of the program distressing. This portrait of Peter William Sutcliffe is presented by Chris Underwood.
This is BBC Radio Leeds. Good morning. It's Thursday, October the 20th, 1975. Police are investigating the discovery of a woman's body on a playing field in the Chapeltown district of Leeds. The woman, who hasn't yet been identified, was found by a milkman on his early delivery round. Murder squad detectives have been called in, and a press conference on the case will be held later this morning.
The broadcast you've just heard marked the first killing in a campaign of violence and death by a man who's been dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. For more than 5 years, the Ripper brought terror to a number of towns and cities in the north of England. For more than 5 years, women were afraid to go out alone in case they became his next victim.
You come up from behind them, they don't have a chance. You're not a man, you're a beast.
Oh, you can hit their headlines all right, but it's nothing to be proud of, the things that you do. And I just don't know how you can sleep at night.
It's deserted on here at nights now. There used to be loads walking up and down. Never see anybody now.
I think you're probably a very inadequate person, certainly physically, and probably mentally too.
Someone wants to get hold of you and do the same things to you as well. Which he might do if they come face to face with you.
Now, I would think that he's probably a rather tall man. He's able to exert quite a lot of strength when he's committed these murders.
Many people are looking for you, and they all hate you.
I wonder who you think you are. Do you damn well think you're God or something? God give life, God taketh it away, not you. I think you are the devil itself.
I was a prostitute then. And that night I was hustling as he left somebody's house. I couldn't tell you which house he left, but he left a house and he waved to somebody. As I approached him, he asked me if I were doing business, and I said yes. He didn't ask me how much, he said £5, so I said okay, and I got into the car then. He drove up Laypole Street onto Chapeltown Road. He only spoke about a few words, but he didn't say his name was Peter Sutcliffe. He told me he was Dave, and I told him to call me Susan. Then he took me to their place where I already knew the place, because I've used that place many times before. He pulled up. He spoke once, he just asked me to get in the back of the car, and I agreed. And as he got out of the car, I put my shoe back on, my left shoe, and then I got out of the car. As I got out to the back door, he attacked me from the back. On the first blow I never felt. On the second and third, I felt it. I put my hands up to my head to more or less save my head, but I got injuries on my thumb and injuries on the back of my head.
The voice of Marilyn Moore, now aged 29 and one of 7 women savagely attacked by the Ripper Peter Sutcliffe and left for dead. Unlike 13 other women, Marilyn recovered, but she still has nightmares about that night in December 4 years ago when she became the Ripper's 10th victim. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on June the 2nd, 1946. His mother Kathleen was a devout Roman Catholic. His father, John Sutcliffe, local singer and keen cricketer, still lives in the area where the family grew up, at Bingley, a West Yorkshire town 10 miles from Bradford.
He was the eldest of the children. He was only a very tiny baby. He was only 5 pounds when he was born. And he took rather a long while to grow up. He wasn't slow by any means, but he could talk just as reasonably as you expect any child to talk, but he was very, very slow getting on his feet. He eventually practically learnt to walk by holding his mother's skirts and going round the house with her. And it was a habit that he clung to until he was about 4 or 5 years of age. Every time she moved, he used to grab her skirt and go after her.
Peter Sutcliffe went to the Roman Catholic Manor Road School at Cottingley near Bingley. One of his teachers was Mr. Louis Mungovin, now retired, who remembers him because he was such an unremarkable boy.
All I can remember is that he was a very quiet, obedient, respectful boy. He never shone in any way, and I would simply say that he was of average intelligence, but very quiet and reserved. And he showed interest, but he was reluctant to take any vocal part.
He didn't mix very well with the other children, because he never had the physical capacity to do so. As a kid, he was always a bit on the light side. You know, he couldn't stand a lot of bullying and pushing around. I know when he started school at first, my wife or myself would go down every afternoon during the afternoon break at school to see how he was getting on, and quite often find him with his back up against a buttress in the playground on the side of the school, sort of standing in the corner, watching the other kids running about. Used to worry me quite a bit.
As a child then, Sutcliffe stood alone. But on reaching his late teens, he came out of his shell. After a series of short-lived jobs, he became a gravedigger and part-time mortuary attendant at Bingley Cemetery. According to friends and relatives, he loved his job and was deeply disappointed when he was sacked for bad timekeeping. His brother, Mick Sutcliffe, whose full story is to appear in the Daily Star newspaper, talks of Peter's physical strength.
I once did a bit of amateur boxing and a hell of a lot of training. I was very fit at the time. Actually, I'm very strong at arm wrestling, you know. I've won gallons of beer in different pubs for it, you know, against 15 stone and 16 stone blokes. And I've only lost to, 2 people, and one of them was my brother, Peter. He's much smaller in height and a stone and a half lighter, but he could beat me, and there's no way, every time we tried he beat me. I just couldn't understand it with weight difference and size. A very strong person indeed.
As a youth, Sutcliffe dressed teddy boy style, developed a keen interest in cars, and frequented the Royal Standard pub near Lum Lane, Bradford's notorious red light district. One of his friends at the time was Laurie Ashton, fellow gravedigger and drinking companion.
In that Royal Standard, we were once in there. Now Peter did something. He banged down on the table or something, and a beer glass got broke in situation accidentally. Now, a certain lad got up and threw a full pint of beer in Peter Sutcliffe's face. Now, that lad didn't retaliate in one way, not even argue.
Another former friend, Keith Sugden, an unemployed printer, recalls a night, however, when Peter Sutcliffe did lose control.
Well, the occasion was one evening, you know. We'll say all we were doing that evening was sort of playing records and listening to tapes, and there was a girl there, she was only about 16, I think, and one of the lads were trying to force his attentions on her, and she started, you know, carrying on a bit. You know, she didn't like it. So Peter stepped in and stuck him one on. That's the only way I can put it. You know, it certainly upset him, did that. Occasionally he just got mad. That's the only time I've seen Peter lose his temper. It's the only one time.
Many people in the area remember Sutcliffe's fascination for prostitutes and sordid liaisons. Men friends recall nights touring the red light districts of northern towns with Sutcliffe at the wheel. On the night before he married, on his stag night, Sutcliffe went curb crawling in Lum Lane. and it's become known that he had an extended affair with a 19-year-old girl called Teresa, who he met on a visit to Motherwell in Scotland. He told her he was Peter Logan, the name of an old friend in Bingley. But despite everything, boyhood friend and fellow lorry driver Malcolm Crook knew Sutcliffe as a shy man who appeared frightened of women.
If he's on his own, or it wasn't with the lads, you know, he'd never chat a young lady up intentionally, himself. If there's 2 or 3 lads there and there's 2 or 3 lasses, then he'd mix, yeah. But somebody had to break the ice for him.
Keith Sugden's wife Doreen, who knew Sutcliffe before she married, confirms this impression.
The local girls never liked him. They'd never go with him, you know. I mean, he used to say to me often, will you get, you know, one of your mates and make a foursome? But none of my mates said, you know, I'd go with him. And I never saw him with any local girls. You know, I think it was because he'd no conversation. It used to be that silly grin, smirky grin. And, you know, they just used to say we're queer.
If we met him in a pub, the girls would more or less go to Peter. Peter'd never go to the girls. Because, you know, when he was young, he's a good-looking lad, you know, he's sort of that foreign continental look. And especially in a semi-dark atmosphere, he, I should say, looked quite attractive to the girls, you know. They certainly got a few over.
But what was the relationship like between Sutcliffe and Keith's wife Doreen?
I don't think he liked me. I don't know, you know, I don't know why. I think I would have, you know, I wouldn't way of him and, you know, Keith. Keith was at our house, and Pete came to the door. We'd arranged to go out with him, actually, the night before. And he came about 9 o'clock in the evening, and he never said about these 2 girls being in the back of the car or anything. We just went out to the car, and these 2 girls, well, one were in the front, one was in the back. And he took us down to a pub called the Vic, down Shipley. And when these 2 girls went to the toilet, Pete turned to me and Keith, and he just said, these 2 girls are on the game. Well, straight away, I got mad, and I said to Keith, I want to go home, you know. So Keith said to Pete, will you run us back to Doreen? She wants to go home. And that was it, he ran us back home. I think it was to try to split mine and his relationship. He admired Keith. In fact, I know it sounds awful, but I thought that Pete was in love with Keith.
Apart from cars, casual drinking and his lorry driving job, Sutcliffe had few interests.
You see, Peter had no musical ability. He liked music, but he couldn't sing. You know, like most lads can get a tune out. Peter never could. I mean, he was one of those lads that, you know, no matter how long he trained him, he'd never be able to get a tone. He couldn't play a musical instrument. I played guitar a little bit. And all he had sort of was his car. It didn't come through, but he hadn't much to grow up on, you know.
And despite his father's attempts to interest him in sport, Sutcliffe had no time for that either. Nor, apparently, during those early years, did he take much notice of girls.
I never knew him to have a steady girlfriend, or even a girlfriend at all, until he met Sonia, the girl he married. And she was only a 16-year-old schoolgirl at the time, but within, probably a fortnight of meeting her, he brought her home and introduced her, and he used to come home with her, bring her home regularly after that. She had very little to say, and when she did say anything, it was in a very, very quiet voice. She almost whispered.
Peter Sutcliffe met Sonia Schirmer, daughter of Czechoslovakian parents, when she was a 16-year-old student. They married in the Baptist Chapel at Clayton near Bradford on the 10th of August 1974, Sonia's 24th birthday.
They kept to themselves again, you see. Whereas we were sat at a table, they were sat on the little stage in Royal Standard then, and they used to just sit between stage and jukebox and just sit together and sort of like keep away from us, you know.
11 months after the wedding, Sutcliffe began the series of attacks on women. The first was the attempted murder of Anna Ragulski at Keighley in June 1975. A month later, Sutcliffe was in Halifax, where he attacked Mrs. Olive Smelt. The first woman to die was Mrs. Wilma McCann, who Sutcliffe picked up in Leeds in October 1975. During this period, Sutcliffe was friendly with Trevor Birdsall, who gave prosecution evidence at the Old Bailey. Birdsall's estranged wife Melissa also knew Sutcliffe well.
He used to go at night and see these prostitutes, and I think all this were happening when she were away. And I mean, she must have known he were faithful to sort of part like that all the time, but he wasn't. I was going to tell her once, because every time she went away, he used to just have a wild time. That's when I knew he used to come for Trev, and they'd sometimes go out 2 nights running. And I even heard that Pete used to go with them at lunchtimes.
Melissa Birdsall also talked about an occasion when Sutcliffe visited their home some years before he got married.
Peter Sutcliffe came round to my ex-husband's and he said, are you off for a drink, Trev? He says, yeah. So it was that night, you know, they went to Halifax, and then something must have happened while they were out, because when my ex-husband came home that night, he said that, you know, they went to Halifax, and Peter Sutcliffe said he did a prostitute overhead with a stone in a sock. So Trevor told me then, and you know, I just said it's rotten, and he seemed alarmed, you know. It sounded as if he was there with him anyway. You know, the way he said that she felt it flow and all that. And then he said he got back in the car, and I think they must have come straight home then that night. He did say, supposing he'd have killed her, Liz. I says, I don't know. I says, he'd have got done, wouldn't he, if he had have done. But it was at back at head. And then he started thinking, you know, that Peter could be Yorkshire Ripper.
And Keith Sugden remembers an occasion when Sutcliffe was obviously concerned about his sexual adventures.
I met him in the Felon's Arms in Bingley, and he said he wanted to see me in Gent's toilet, and I got in the toilet, and he got his private part out and said to me, I think I've got a dose of one of them mucky women. So I told him if he were worried about it, he'd better move up to St Luke's Hospital, which I believe they had the VD unit up there. He just sort of laughed, you know. He had a certain laugh at Peter. It was sort of in between a laugh and a smirk, and he went, you know, and one of them mucky women. So whether that were a prostitute or somebody he knew, you know, I couldn't honestly say.
For the first 3 years of their marriage, Peter and Sonia Sutcliffe lived with her parents at Clayton. Then, in 1977, they moved into a 4-bedroom detached house which cost £16,500 at number 6 Garden Lane in the fashionable Bradford suburb of Heaton. That year, 1977, saw the Ripper at his most active, killing 4 women and leaving 2 more for dead. It became clear at the trial that Peter and Sonia's relationship was somewhat strained, but this was not altogether obvious to the rest of the family.
The marriage was perfectly happy. They were working hard on the home they got. They worked hard to get it. And it wasn't just a house. It was a home. They made it into a home. It was a beautiful place. And they'd done it all themselves. And there was no cause to think at all that there was any problems, if you like, between them.
Police are now satisfied that Sonia Sutcliffe knew nothing about her husband's nocturnal activities because he often worked overnight and she had a job as a nursing auxiliary. The couple were devoted to children, but apparently were unable to have a family of their own. At the time of Sutcliffe's arrest, they were contemplating the idea of adopting 2 Vietnamese boat children.
Well, it's fairly common knowledge now because the neighbours have put it round to the different press agencies that Sonia actually had a couple of miscarriages.
Did Sonia or Peter confirm that?
Oh yes, Peter came down here and told us before his mother died, and he was absolutely heartbroken about it.
Was Sonia distressed as well?
Well, we didn't see Sonia for quite a few weeks. She didn't come out till she completely got over it, and by the time she did come again, she seemed to be quite normal again.
At the height of the inquiry, the man who'd been leading the Ripper hunt, West Yorkshire's Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield, suffered a heart attack after 33 years' service and had to be taken off the case. He was bitterly disappointed, regarding the arrest of the Ripper as a personal challenge, and because, over the years, he developed a clear idea of the sort of man he was looking for.
We have a picture of a man early 30s upwards, possibly to mid-50s. A man, an artisan, skilled, semi-skilled type rather than the executive clerical type. A strong, well-built man. A man who obviously has a motor vehicle. A man who has a hatred of women of the streets, which could be for a variety of reasons. Generally, I think we have a pretty clear picture in our mind's eye of the type of individual that we're looking for.
Peter Sutcliffe, while never a prime police suspect, was questioned by them on 9 occasions. The first time was after his car was spotted in Chapeltown, the red light district of Leeds. The second occasion was after a brand new £5 note was discovered on the body of one of his victims, Jean Royal, otherwise known as Jordan, in Manchester more than 3 years ago. Police believed it could have been issued at the Bradford engineering firm where Sutcliffe worked as a long-distance lorry driver. Every driver on the payroll was interviewed, including Malcolm Crook.
We got a total 100% police search on his respective homes, saliva samples, blood sample, handwriting sample, teeth. They checked his tools, his boots for feet print, car tyres, pulled his cars in bits, and everything turned out normal. And then 2 years later, they did exactly the same again. At the particular time they went through us all together, all in a block bunch. They did us as individuals at his own homes, but they did us all on the same evening, on the same day. So the following morning, we're just chaos at work. Everybody was talking about it, and that were it.
What was Peter Sutcliffe's reaction to this?
It was just the same as anybody else's. They did my card, did they do your teeth, did they take a blood sample? It just sort of same as everybody else's.
Despite rigorous questioning, during constant visits from the police, Sutcliffe remained unshaken, and both he and his wife gave police alibis. The managing director of the firm, where Sutcliffe earned £140 a week, is Mr. William Clark, who remembers the £5 note inquiry.
4 or 5 firms in this area drew money from that bank on a certain date, and it went on from there, and they came in and they checked through everybody in the works to check on the money and also on where they were on certain days. That took about a week after then certain other things came in the handwriting. And they came in again and we had to check all the dates over again. They went through all the handwriting again and we had to write a certain sentence out which actually didn't make sense, but obviously there were certain words in there that had to be reproduced. They then took Peter, was taken in for further questioning to the police station, was there for quite a considerable time.
It's now clear that Sutcliffe realised his mistake over the £5 note and returned to Manchester, where the body of Jean Royal was still undiscovered. He wanted to trace her handbag and planned to decapitate the body in order to remove the Ripper's trademark, hammer blows to the skull. All this took place after a housewarming party at the new home in Garden Lane, Bradford. But Sutcliffe still managed to drive several relatives home before making a frantic dash across the Pennines to the murder spot. Assistant Chief Constable Jim Hobson, who took over from George Oldfield, explained why Sutcliffe was never high on the list of suspects.
He was seen on several occasions. This was in connection with a murder inquiry in the Manchester area when a £5 note was found on one of the victims. And of course it was traced back to the Bradford and Bingley area. When he was seen on that occasion, it was only in relation to tracing money to the Yorkshire area. He wasn't seen as a suspect on those occasions, and he was one of 8,000 people at that time. On the second occasion he was seen, this was in connection with the inquiries that we had been doing in the West Yorkshire area and various other large cities outside this area. It feels fairly secure because both those inquiries, he was not really a suspect. We were looking for information, and therefore it would feel fairly secure.
For nearly 3 years, the police were hunting the wrong man. This was because in March 1978, they received 3 letters and a tape recording from a man with a Sunderland or Newcastle accent claiming to be the Ripper.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper. Hope you like the catchy tune at the end. Ha ha.
It's now widely believed that the letters and the tape recording were the work of a super hoaxer, although there's the possibility that the author was responsible for another murder in Preston and was trying to shift the blame onto the real Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. But from a very early stage, Mr. Jack Windsor Lewis, a linguistics expert at Leeds University, was convinced that the police were on the wrong track.
I heard the tape, as everybody else did, that was released about the 26th of June 1979, and at that moment I expected that a voice so immediately identifiable as that would be identified, and one expected that the man would have been apprehended within a day or so of the release of the tape. Well, it's quite impossible, I'm sure, that he wasn't immediately recognised by several people at least when the broadcast was made initially, but they immediately recognised that they'd heard somebody who could not possibly have committed any murders. So they immediately passed over him. They left him totally out of consideration.
So why didn't the police accept his advice?
We still felt that the evidence against its being the killer's voice was so strong from our linguistic point of view that we were never convinced. They had to take action, and they were quite right to do so when they did. The great disappointment for them and us was the fact that nothing came of it. And naturally, as time went by, it seemed more and more likely that they had taken the wrong direction in giving credence to this tape and letter as being the work of the murderer.
But Assistant Chief Constable Jim Hobson, who by now was leading the hunt for the Ripper, justified police action.
On all murder inquiries, we follow all lines of inquiries, and many of them are fruitless. This isn't unusual on this series of murders, but of course, on this occasion, there have been a number of murders when the letters and tapes were received, and one is faced with the problem, well, what shall we do? Shall we not tell the public about those tapes and those letters? Just imagine the outcry there would have been had we not published those letters and tapes, and the man responsible was in fact the author of those tapes.
Two people who suffered great embarrassment from the £1 million advertising campaign mounted after the letters and tapes were received were Fred Catto and his wife Julie.
I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again, but it will be definitely sometime this year.
At first, when it first started, it was just a joke, really, to me, but then it starts, people are always, were at the time, constantly cracking to you, even calling us Jack sometimes. I'll give you an instance, actually. Julie jogged my memory last night, and there used to be this tuck shop just across the road from where we were working, you see, and it was closed this day for an holiday. So we went looking around front of the shop to get something to eat, and we found this one, and I went in first, and I says, "Do you do any sandwiches, love?" And she says, "No, but I can do you some." And I could visibly see the colour drain from her face, I could. Anyway, she went running into the back, made us up a few sandwiches. She only charges about 20 pence. Two of the sandwiches, just to get us out of the shop, I think.
Fred was mending the car outside and they came in, and it upset me a little bit because they were asking me questions about Fred. And Fred wasn't present, such as, does he go out on his own on a night? How's your sex life? Which was one that took me back a bit. What does he wear to go out in? Have you got a good relationship? Does he ever get angry at the children? Does he like women? All these type of questions, well, Fred wasn't present. But luckily I've got a sense of humour as well, so you can banter them back, really, which is how you've got to handle that situation.
There was nobody more relieved than us, though, when that called him. I was over the moon, mate.
Public anger at the Ripper's activities reached a peak after the last murder, that of Leeds University student Jacqueline Hill, in November last year. The vicar of her local church expressed the feelings of many at the funeral service.
All who knew her speak with admiration of Jacqueline Hill, and we are glad that we knew her. We feel a deep sense of shock, grief, and anger because her death was not an accident, and we hope and pray there may be no more funerals like this one.
By now, feelings were running so high that West Yorkshire's Chief Constable, Mr. Ronald Gregory, set up a special Ripper think tank of senior policemen. He also received a visit from the Home Secretary, Mr. William Whitelaw, who ran the gauntlet of angry and frightened women when he arrived.
Well, I've had the chance of coming here to see the Chief Constable of the West Yorkshire Police today. I was very anxious to do so in order to show them the complete confidence that I have in all the work that is being done. I am very glad that the Chief Constable decided that he would like the full assistance of the British Police Service, and with discussions with my Inspector of Constabulary, he has assembled, and with the help of other forces, some very considerable brains of the police service in the particular field of detection. I believe this shows the complete dedication of the whole police service to helping the West Yorkshire Police in their very difficult and important task.
Sutcliffe's victims ranged in age from 16 to 46. The youngest was Jane MacDonald, killed in the early hours as she walked home through Chapeltown in Leeds. Her father, retired railwayman Wilf MacDonald, never recovered from the shock. Her mother, Irene, will never forget.
I've had a good friend of mine, her son, come running and saying, Uncle Wilf's crying, and they'd never seen my husband cry before, you see. He said, and there's some big men in, there could be policemen, he says, and he's crying, so I knew it could only be connected with Jane. She was the only one not in the house, you see. And when the police said, are you Mr. MacDonald, Jane MacDonald's father, and he said yes. He said, and wait while she comes in, I'll kill her for not ringing. So they said, you won't have to do, somebody's done it for you.
Melissa Birdsall, you'll recall, told of how her ex-husband Trevor always harboured the belief that his friend Peter Sutcliffe could be the Yorkshire Ripper. He admitted as much at the Old Bailey trial. At first he wrote to the police anonymously. Finally he decided to visit them in person.
They didn't want to know when he went down. I asked him, I says, had you told him about that stone in the sock? And he'd left in the car for an hour, and you know, I used to go out regular and all that, and he said he'd tools in his car as well. I said, did you tell police that? He said he told him everything and they just weren't interested.
Last June, Sutcliffe was breathalyzed as he drove through Manningham, the red light area of Bradford. He was given notice of intended prosecution. When he was arrested in the company of a prostitute early this year, his car carried false number plates, and the men who detained him were not from the Ripper Squad, but two policemen on routine vice patrol. It was just a matter of luck.
You've got to create that piece of luck yourself, you know, in all murders. Unless you do all the things that you should do, unless you conduct a thorough investigation, then you don't get that piece of luck. I think probably he was beginning to think, well, he was a little bit smart, and there was just a need then to put false number plates onto his car with a view to evading arrest. Certainly on many murder inquiries, as you know, when we do house-to-house inquiries, the whole idea of a murder inquiry is to make the man panic, to do something that he wouldn't normally do, and then we recognise that, and then he comes within the net. And of course, at the end of the day, we've won. We've caught the man, and we've solved all these murders. I do hope that the public will remember that.
There have been many theories about Sutcliffe's motives for killing. Only once did he have sexual intercourse with a victim. None of them was robbed. So is he a woman-hater? His brother Mick thinks not.
As far as I know, I can only tell you what I think and what I know. But I've known him a lot of years. I've been out drinking with him many and many a night. We've chatted birds up over the years. And he's been just beautiful with them, you know. There's no trouble whatsoever. It's just unbelievable. There's no way he hated women. No way at all in my mind. I've said one or two things when I've been to visit him in jail, but I just can't say anything about that, you know. It's just between me and him, is that, but... You know, it's no excuse, no reason he's given me whatsoever when he's told me. I mean, I don't think he knows himself. I can't think of one instance, just not one instance, why.
Other theories include Peter Sutcliffe's upbringing. Local gossips talk about his father's womanising, but John Sutcliffe wants to put the record straight.
Absolute nonsense. I only had one affair about 4 years before my wife died, and that was the family all understand about it, why it happened, and to say that I had lots of girlfriends is absolute nonsense.
Did it at any time occur to you that it could have influenced Peter, though? I mean, even though now you know that it didn't, were you concerned that it might have done at the time?
Most certainly. Most certainly. That's why I gave a full account of it to both the police and to the solicitor, so that if necessary the psychiatrist could use this thing to see if it had any bearing on it. But later, when I found out that he'd actually been attacking girls for some years before this happened, I knew that it was no longer an argument. So there's no point in pursuing that any further.
For much of the inquiry, Wakefield psychiatrist Dr. Stephen Shaw advised the West Yorkshire Police and kept in close contact with colleagues working on the case. At the trial, Sutcliffe was described as a paranoid schizophrenic. So how did doctors reach this conclusion?
He fell into one of the two broad categories which psychiatry has traditionally said should be looked for when a major crime of this nature was being investigated. The two categories were the aggressive psychopath and the psychotic. It is most commonly the aggressive psychopath who commits these offences, but now it is clear that Sutcliffe was psychotic. It's equally clear that we can add other adjectives to that and say that he was delusionally psychotic, and indeed that it was a suppressed delusional psychosis. Now, what do we mean by these terms? We mean that he suffered from a form of mental illness where his mind lost touch with reality. That, in effect, is the psychosis part of it. The delusional element means that his mind suddenly, perhaps more than 5 years ago, entertained a thought which became totally fixed and permanent in his mind, that he was being instructed by God to go out and murder prostitutes. Suppressed means that he simply had the capacity to keep this homicidal thought and the fact that he lost touch with reality at times a secret from everybody around him. This, therefore, would enable him from time to time to simply go out and murder a prostitute, to return home, and without making anybody aware of what he has done, carry on at his place of work as though nothing had happened.
I asked Dr. Shaw then if he could say whether Sutcliffe was born with a mental disorder or whether his condition developed as he grew up.
You have asked the $64,000 question in psychiatry. You have summed up the whole debate of, is a disorder such as this nature or nurture? Is it the way that people are brought up? Or is it in fact that these individuals simply have chemicals inside their brain where the mechanism has gone wrong? We, if I'm honest, don't know. There's a lot of research which indicates a genetic element to it, that it's a inheritable disorder. There's also a lot of research in terms of the way children are brought up. People talk about schizophrenogenic mothers. It may be a combination of everything, but so far as I am concerned, it is a chemically determined disorder of brain function.
It's a queer subject when you know actually he is the Ripper, but when you've known him as a friend, biggest part of your life, to my mind, is still a friend. I'd go out with him tonight.
Why?
He's a friend, he's a very good friend. He's been good to me all my life. He's helped me out, fixed my cars. If you ever needed an hand where you couldn't, on your own, Peter would help you. If you ever needed a loan, if you'd got any money, Peter would help you. He'd do anything for you. You don't know what turns a fellow that way or what causes him to do it. But I'd trust him with my daughters, my own daughters, and the person I know.
In spite of everything he's done, in spite of what he has become, he's still my son. And I'm going to have to live with this the rest of my life. I'm not condoning what he's done. I'm not defending him in any way. Whatever punishment he's got, he'll have to bear with it. He knows that himself. But no way am I going to desert him. I'm not going to write him off. I want to remember the lad as he was. The fact that these things have happened is always, of course, going to be in the back of our minds. We shall never forget all the trauma of this thing, and the victims and their relatives. We shall always, I'm sure, have the deepest sympathy with all of them, whoever they are, wherever they may be. It's a terrible thing to have to bear. It's a terrible thing to have to live with. But we've got to live with it. We've got to learn to live with it.
My husband had to identify Jane, you see. And I think that was the last straw. When he got back from the mortuary, he just collapsed and we to get the doctor in. And after that, the doctor was coming 3 times a day for about a month. And then every day for about 2 months after that to give him injections. The nervous system hadn't been able to take it, and it brought bronchial asthma on. And it was bronchial asthma, And he never looked up no more after that. He never went no further than the garden. And if somebody broached the subject, his eyes would just fill with tears. So people used to avoid that knew him, And he says, Rini, I've been all through the war. He says, but when you look at your own flesh and blood on a slab like that, he says, it's just different. And he used to be a good sketcher, and I used to pick papers up where he'd sketch Jane. As it would just, and it really was a big obsession that he'd lived to see this man caught, but he died.
Wilf MacDonald died of a broken heart, one of the many innocent victims to suffer indirectly at the hands of the Yorkshire Ripper. And to echo the words of his father, Peter Sutcliffe has got to learn to live with that. He's got to learn to live with the fact that he killed 13 women and destroyed the lives of 7 others, the victims who suffered terrible injuries but nevertheless recovered. He's got to learn to live with the fact that for more than 5 years he terrorized, brutalized and degraded a number of northern towns and cities where he wielded the hammer and the knife. He's got to learn to live with the fact that he rendered 23 children motherless, that he cost the nation £4 million and 5 million hours of police time, that a well-liked and respected police officer suffered 2 heart attacks at the peak of a distinguished career, and that the people of West Yorkshire are even now still recovering from the way in which the Ripper caused a traumatic and dramatic change in their everyday lives. The doctors have had their say, the jury have made their decision, but in the opinion of another leading psychiatrist, it will be many years yet, and medical science will be much more advanced, before we even begin to understand what really went on in the dark mind of Peter Sutcliffe, the man history will remember as the Yorkshire Ripper.
That was a radio news production. Presenter, Chris Underwood. Producer, Ian Anthony. BBC, 7 o'clock. This is the news. Peter William Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, is beginning a life sentence in jail after being found guilty of murdering 13 women by a jury at the Old Bailey. The jury weren't able to reach unanimous verdicts, but by a majority of 10-2, they returned after nearly 6 hours of deliberation to reject Sutcliffe's pleas of manslaughter on the ground of diminished responsibility. The judge recommended that Sutcliffe, who's 34, should not be released on license for at least 30 years. The judge, Mr. Justice Boreham, said it was an unusually long period, but Sutcliffe was an unusually dangerous man. The judge commended the assiduous performance of 2 police officers who arrested Sutcliffe after the biggest manhunt in British criminal history, while on humdrum and routine duty. For 5 years, Sutcliffe, a lorry driver from Bradford, had driven freely over a wide area between Leeds and Manchester, attacking women. It's just after 6:15. In the next 45 minutes, we shall be bringing you a background on Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who was today sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 13 women in the north of England. He was a young man so apparently ordinary that for 5 years he was able to elude the biggest manhunt in British criminal history. In that time, he drove freely over a wide area between Leeds and Manchester, attacking and murdering women. Some listeners may find parts of the program distressing. This portrait of Peter William Sutcliffe is presented by Chris Underwood.
This is BBC Radio Leeds. Good morning. It's Thursday, October the 20th, 1975. Police are investigating the discovery of a woman's body on a playing field in the Chapeltown district of Leeds.
You're not a man, you're a beast.
Oh, you can hit their headlines all right, but it's nothing to be proud of, the things that you do. And I just don't know how you can sleep at night.
It's deserted on here at nights now. There used to be loads walking up and down. Never see anybody now.
I think you're probably a very inadequate person, certainly physically, and probably mentally too.
Someone wants to get hold of you and do the sins.
The woman, who hasn't yet been identified, was found by a milkman on his early delivery round. Murder squad detectives have been called in, and a press conference on the case will be held later this morning.
The broadcast you've just heard marked the first killing in a campaign of violence and death by a man who's been dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. For more than 5 years, the Ripper brought terror to a number of towns and cities in the north of England. For more than 5 years, women were afraid to go out alone in case they became his next victim.
You come up from behind them, they don't have a chance.
And I said yes. He didn't ask me how much, he said £5, so I said okay, and I got into the car then. He drove up Laypole Street onto Chapeltown Road. He only spoke about a few words, but he didn't say his name was Peter Sutcliffe. He told me he was Dave, and I told him to call me Susan. Then he took me to their place where I already knew the place, because I've used that place many times before. He pulled up. He spoke once, he just asked me to get in the back of the car, and I agreed. And as he got out of the car, I put my shoe back on, my left shoe, and then I got out of the car. As I got out to the back door, he attacked me from the back. On the first blow, I never felt. On the second and third, I felt it. I put my hands up to my head to more or less save my head, but I got injuries on my thumb and injuries on the back of my head.
The things to you as well, which he might do. He could come face to face with you.
Now, I would think that he's probably a rather tall man. He's able to exert quite a lot of strength when he's committed these murders.
Many people are looking for you, and they all hate you.
I wonder who you think you are. you damn well think you're God or something? God give life, God taketh it away, not you. I think you are the devil itself.
I was a prostitute then. And that night I was hustling as he left somebody's house. I couldn't tell you which house he left, but he left a house and he waved to somebody. As I approached him, he asked me if I were doing business,